She's been called the hooker from hell.
Terrorized men along Florida's highways.
She's a wild, boozing, lesbian prostitute.
In 1997, Aileen said, I'm going to tell you the truth of my life and give you this interview.
The real Aileen Wuornos is not a serial killer. I was so lost that I turned into one.
This is Factual America. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos murdered 7 men across Central Florida in a killing spree that transfixed a nation and ultimately landed her on death row. Despite scores of documentaries and true crime dramas, have we gotten the story wrong all along? The new Netflix documentary, Aileen, Queen of the Serial Killers, revisits Aileen's life with the benefit of never-before-seen death row footage and audio interviews with those who knew her best. Director Emily Turner's film reveals a woman who is much more complex and nuanced than we were originally led to believe. Stay tuned. Emily Turner, how are things with you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, welcome to Factual America. To remind our listeners and viewers, we're talking about Aileen, Queen of the Serial Killers, streaming on Netflix from October 30th. So congratulations again, Emily, and for getting this project done in the can and on Netflix, and it's great to have you on. We usually start these things by asking filmmakers to tell us what the film's about. I think it's pretty obvious what it's about. It's about Aileen Wuornos, the as titled, Queen of the Serial Killers. But what is this film about? Maybe you can give us a little synopsis.
So this film came about because some colleagues of mine at BBC, who were working at BBC Studios, got access to an Australian-born artist who developed a relationship from writing to Aileen Wuornos on death row, and her name was Jasmine Hurst, and she was able to secure an interview with Aileen on death row, where Aileen kind of speaks for the first time about all of the murders. So she's killed 7 men over the course of roughly a year, at the end of the 80s, early 90s, and so that's the sort of genesis of this project, is this interview that's never been seen before, where Aileen kind of talks about her life and the crimes. So that was a starting point, and then it felt like it was a kind of insight into this woman who many people know from the movie Monster, where Charlize Theron famously played her, and there have been films, quite a good few films made about this subject, but I guess this interview gave us an insight into her as I don't think she's been seen before.
Yeah, and I was good. So I think that's very important. Just as I'll step back quickly here. I think most people are pretty aware of Aileen Wuornos, but my entire adult life, she's been a kind of an icon of sorts, right? She's been there. So maybe just for our listeners, just for those who, we have younger listeners too, maybe not that much aware, maybe a little bit about who she was and what she did in sort of 1989-90 and why she became this such a, well, I don't think celebrity is the wrong word, to be honest.
No,
she became notorious. She was certainly notorious, yeah.
Yeah. So as you said, from the end of 1989 to later on in 1990, Aileen murdered 7 men, and to that point she had been a hitchhiking sex worker, working all around America, but at that particular time period mainly within Florida. And she shot to kind of fame, infamy, whatever the term is. And it's a really interesting point in time to think about our relationship to true crime and true crime stories, because it was really in many ways sort of at its apex then. The networks were generating huge audiences for these kind of made-for-TV movie. They all had the movies of the week that would often be these true crime tellings, and so she really sits apart in that she's a female perpetrator, and so it was a very kind of tantalizing story for both the tabloid media, but also this kind of made for movies kind of audience that were
right. Because is it right to say she's like the first female serial killer, or at least the first type? I mean, there've been women who've killed multiple people before, but there's something about her that seemed different, and maybe she comes right on the back end of like Bundy and some of these other male serial killers that were really big, right?
She's certainly given that title. Whether or not that kind of holds water factually is up for debate. But certainly, if you were to, I've got a book over there called like America's Serial Killer that calls this the golden age of serial killers. So you're not right, you're not wrong to highlight that period of time. I think women have killed in this way, but they tend to have been either caregivers, so like nurses, or it's been in a kind of domestic space. But certainly, killing in the violent way that she did, killing men with, that sets her apart. She's a pretty unique case.
Okay, so you had these never before seen death row interviews at I forget the Australian-born filmmaker's name.
Jasmine Hurst.
Yeah, Jasmine, right, Jasmine. So you've got that, which is incredible, because that's, as you say, it's we've never seen this footage before, right? But you also have all these audio interviews, right? Have those been heard before, or is that a collection of recordings that of over the years?
So we went out and I went out and recorded those interviews that you hear in the film, and really we had the luxury of an amount of time with this story. Netflix were incredible to work with, and I had about 2 years kind of making this film, from the research to where we are now, and was really keen to find voices that really were involved in this story and either haven't spoken before or haven't spoken in this way before. And so it started with the Jasmine Hurst interview, and then we partnered with NBC, and we were able to get the Dateline investigation, the rushes of that investigation, from this incredible kind of trailblazing female journalist, Michelle Gillen, who I'm sort of surprised that she's not known more widely. It was such a privilege to be able to watch all of her investigation.
Well, yeah, I looked her up today. I recognized her. I'm born and raised in the States and lived there till about 20 years ago. But so I definitely recognized her. But then, I thought, why haven't we heard of? That's another. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But unfortunately, she's passed away already. She's. But yeah, and she's also involved in some other sort of trailblazing work and efforts, certainly for women journalists. So a very interesting character. But yeah, that's very compelling.
Yeah, and it's an archive-only film, just because of the experience of doing the research. It was so kind of captivating to be in the 90s, and it's a period of time that is at once a long time ago, but also doesn't feel that long ago. And I really wanted the audience to have similar experiences to the ones I had doing the research, which was so interesting living in that archive. And I didn't want the kind of interviews modern day to kind of interrupt that. I think there are so many kind of tropes of storytelling in the true crime space, and we really wanted to like push the envelope and have people inhabit the story in the way that I was able to in the research, and hopefully come to their own conclusions, because it isn't a story that lives in the worlds of black and white and right and wrong, and there are no kind of neat filing cabinets in your head to put Aileen. And 2 years out, I still feel confused about the whole story.
Well, you raise a very interesting point, and something I wanted to raise with you is just that. So, what was your view of Aileen going into the project? Because I don't know if you'd seen Jasmine's footage yet, but you obviously you probably had a view of who she was. So, what was your view going in?
I think I was tentative about the notion of making this film, because I think particularly within the true crime space, you have to really, as a filmmaker, kind of grapple with the purpose and why it is you want to be telling this story, because of course, it's problematic.
Told multiple times before.
It has been told multiple times before, and you have to really understand why are we doing this now and what are we contributing to it. And so I didn't So aside from not being sure about all of that, I kind of sat with the Jasmine interview. It's quite a confusing interview to get one's head around. She kind of she flits from being incredibly human and almost
right.
She's pretty charismatic, and then kind of you see the kind of rage flashing through her eyes, and then she starts listing them off, and wasn't quite sure how to feel. And then the next thing I watched was her on the stand in the only case that she went to trial for, which was the Richard Mallory, and she's there for an hour and a half talking about a pretty brutal and horrific sexual assault. And I felt so, I've spent a lot of time as a filmmaker in, difficult subjects, and I had a kind of visceral emotional reaction to it, and I kind of had to go for a walk around the block. I was like, can I really make a film about this? This is really moving. And I think in that moment I was really with her, but then you watch something else and you're like, oh no, she's like really taking joy in this, and she's really enjoying being filmed and her celebrity, and so she's just such a whirling contradiction of things, this character.
Well, that was a question I had for you later, but who is the real Aileen Wuornos, right? I mean, because your film does. I mean, we see all the different footage, so you're thinking, okay, I kind of had her wrong, all right? I mean, or more than. I mean, I can say I did have a wrong impression of her before seeing this film, but then I wasn't quite as wrong as I thought I was after some other footage comes on board, right? You're like, well, and you must have struggled with this. Like, who is the real Aileen Wuornos? So you don't know because she's been executed. That's almost exactly about 23 years ago, I think. So it's like, so that must have been challenging. But then also, what surprised you most? I mean, coming in, so you start sitting with this footage and archival.
What surprised me most? I think I don't have a clear, just to go back to the first part of your question, I don't have a clear sense of kind of who she was. I think her life was living in survival mode. I think she didn't ever really get to enjoy life in the way that someone who hasn't had a similar set of life experiences, like speaking as myself, I enjoyed the life that I live, and I think that's never something she had the opportunity to do. I think audiences are smart, and I think we underestimate that. I think people are going to bring their own life experiences and and I'm really interested as to where people land with that. We've really tried intentionally in the film to have our hands as filmmakers feel as absent and as light as possible so that people do go on this journey. I remember early on in my research notes, I wrote at the top of this Word document, like, I want people to feel as confused as I am. And I think that without wanting to put people off watching the film, like, I think, if you're feeling like that feels like a big tick to me, because I think so often in life, as I said before, we want certainty, particularly today. We want the right and we want the wrong, and we want to know how to feel about things. And actually life isn't like that. And as filmmakers, we inhabit that grey space, don't we? And I think but more importantly for me, it's like, what does she say, but like, what does her story and how she was treated say about all of us, our interest in true crime, our prejudices and bias that are built into police investigations, to the criminal justice system? Like, that's almost more interesting to me than this woman herself.
Right. Well, so let's go back to the milieu that we're talking about. We're talking about, well, technically very late 80s, but definitely the 90s, right? And the thing that struck me, I was watching it with my wife, and so 1990s isn't very long ago in my mind, but at the same time, there's some footage in there that I was like, wow, that does look like a long time ago now. But things like, even before she's caught, or even after she's caught, no spoiler alerts here, she definitely killed 7 men. Right.
Yeah.
She's, you could get into some, I don't know, maybe even not even a debate. It's now starting to, as your film shows, there's a good chance one was at least self-defense, right? If not more than one. But we also know others weren't, seemingly. But, what is some of the voiceover from some of the, whether it's a reporter or I don't think not even Dateline didn't do this, if I recall correctly, but some of the other stuff you had, like local TV news and things like that. she's a stalker. There's a stalker out there, a predator. Watch out, men. She's out to get you. Kind of feeling to it. And what we are talking about is a woman who was, besides the horrible life she had to live through, she was a sex worker walking along the highway, and being picked up. And she killed the Johns, but she hadn't gone out of her way to start stalking men to lure them down. I mean, it was that kind of lurid, very lurid kind of element to it, wasn't it?
Yeah, we have these sort of sections of the film where you are hearing the voices and the news and it's lines like wild, boozing, lesbian, prostitute, and it's the kind of casual, just misogyny. But I guess Aileen kind of, in a world before we talked about unconscious bias or had terms like intersectionality, like she inhabits nearly all of those marginalized, vulnerable groups, right? She's from an incredibly impoverished background. She's a sex worker. She's gay. She's like I said, the reaction to her is so interesting as a filmmaking subject, even more so than potentially than her, really.
I mean, it's kind of had a bit of an element of 1950s, 60s Pulp Fiction kind of stuff. You can already see the cover right in your head in terms of what that paperback would look like, with like you said, the what you saw, stalking lesbians, prostitute or whatever it is. I mean, not to be laughing about it, but it is kind of an odd, it was, it is very interesting. And I think, you want the film to speak for itself, but what are the things we really get wrong about her, you think? Or have gotten wrong about her in the past?
I think it's so easy to kind of fall into, and when you look at the conversation online about her, and she's certainly within a younger demographic has seen a kind of resurgence. And I think Cardi B was mimicking that very famous image of her with the handcuffs kind of over her neck, and there's these hashtag Stan Aileen Wuornos accounts, and you sort of the thinking kind of tends to fall into these binary camps of she is either hapless victim or she is cold-blooded killer. And actually I don't think either of those are, she doesn't fall squarely into either of those. And in some ways that would have been she refused as well to be seen as a victim. She didn't want to be seen. There's a moment in the interview where Jasmine says, it must have been really hard for you. I'm sorry about all the rapes that you endured. And Aileen comes straight back at her and says, well, a wussy woman, it would have bothered her, but not me, I'm tough. And it's like, she's so complex, and I think today we have a far more nuanced understanding of how one can be a victim and a perpetrator of crime. So it's just she's just this kind of very strange and heady mix of kind of charismatic but also a killer. She's this sort of searing truth teller as she's standing on the stand in trial and saying about how there's this sexual double standard about how women are treated and men are treated, and she's not believed, but then she's also a liar. She's just so many things, and she's also smart, and it's a really difficult truth to bear that someone can commit crimes like this and not just be an awful monster, and to look, and she is also pretty human at points, and that's a really difficult truth to look in the face, and that felt like the job of this film.
I wasn't aware that she's kind of had a moment again, but you were describing some of these things that lately, especially among a younger demographic, and how she talks, she's all these different things that you just described. But, I think one thing that's a lot of the other, I'm not that I've watched many of them. I did see Monster way back in the day, right? I think I've seen another doc, one of the ones from the 2010s or late 2000s or whatever. But it's because one thing you had in there is because there's a lot made out about her difficult. The film doesn't dwell on it much, but a lot of made up. I know others have talked a lot about her upbringing. Her the horrible situation she was born into and her childhood. But she's very, I would say, kind of glossy about it. and when she's asked about it. I mean, I was kind of taken aback, and my wife, who knows much more about this than I did, was like, actually, I thought her grandfather did this, and I thought her brother did that, kind of thing. And she's just kind of like, oh, I had this great upbringing, and then, doesn't mention that she got kicked out of the house and she was living in the woods, and her family wouldn't let her back in, or whatever was the truth. How much of is that true? How much of what is the truth? Or do we know what the truth really is with regards to her upbringing?
So there are sections in the film that you refer to where she's kind of telling her own story, and that's taken from the Jasmine interview. And this is sort of to my earlier point. What's so kind of interesting in many ways about her is her sort of refusal to be defined by her victim status, right? And actually you can't help but wonder, might she have been more palatable and have had a kind of different experience of, in terms of her portrayal, had she kind of been more open or willing to be seen as a victim, but she's the kind of hero in her own story, and she is a pretty unreliable narrator. So we kind of play with that in the film. Later, as you get into the body of the film, you do hear more biographical details from her childhood friend Dawn Botkins. But yeah, it's pretty like with anything, it's hard to really know the truth, but there's pretty good, and we'd spent a lot of time tracking down, family, friends, and people who grew up with her. And yeah, I mean, the truth is what your wife kind of alluded to. It was a pretty dire set of circumstances. She was rescued by her grandparents from being in pretty neglected state by her, and yeah, I think it was a very dysfunctional and abusive household, and she had a baby at 14, and yeah, it's Dickensian in its kind of horror.
Yeah, she had a baby at 14, but there's even a clip in your film there where she says she's never had any children, if I recall correctly, right? So it's like, that's the thing. You're talking about earlier about this you want everyone to be as confused as you were. I think you've succeeded. It's like,
well, hopefully in a way that doesn't make the film unintelligible. But
no, it's very intelligible. I think it's very, it's excellent. I think it's a very good. I mean, it's unencumbered by what's. I mean, you obviously have everything that's happened before in terms of films and treatments and stuff like this, but yet it's unencumbered by that, which I think is really, really good. Who cares if you don't have to tell the whole family. You could spend you've only got an hour and a half. We had a little bit more than that, right? An hour and 45 to tell the story. There's so much there that you're not going to be able to fit into.
Yeah, I guess it was also not wanting to fall too much into those tropes of painting her as this victim as well, because she's more than that, and that's to kind of underestimate her agency in what happened as well.
And well, the other thing that struck me is because you have a lot of I forget her names, but the Hollywood producer.
Yeah, Jackie Giroux.
Yeah, wow, she's a character, I think. And she's, great audio. And Aileen's very aware of her celebrity, isn't she? Like, early on. That's one of the things I found most surprising. I mean, she knew that it was a story that would sell.
Yeah, Jackie Giroux was an actress turned movie producer who kind of saw the story in the press and thought knew she was the woman to tell it, and I think it turns out that no one was really ready for her to tell that story. Then everybody wanted the police procedural, the true crime film that's been made many times, and so it was a real. We were really delighted when Jackie decided to come and be interviewed and share her story for the film. But she's one of the most knowing people about Aileen in the film. She really sees that, she feels at certain points like she's being, she's acting as Eileen's agent. She goes down to the Last Resort bar where Eileen's been seen and puts up posters saying, "Are you the woman killing all the men? I want to talk to you." And Aileen rings her. It's the first call she makes from prison when she's arrested. So yeah, and Jackie's voice was so helpful in kind of bringing this portrayal of Aileen that we wanted to, which is, as I say, so much more nuanced and complicated than being either a victim or a cold-blooded killer. someone who, and it's such an indictment, I think, of the world that we live in, that really it was the first time in Eileen's life that she was ever somebody or listened to, because it was at this time where true crime and serial killers were of such kind of tantalizing interest to the world, and she realized she then finally had currency.
Well, the thing that struck me is that, and we were talking about it here, is that the tragedy is prison is probably where she was treated the best, right? And everything that came with it. So people came and visited her, and people wanted to film her, and there were people who she had people who adopted her. I wasn't aware of that. So yeah, she even actually, after a few, you would never. I don't know if you could ever say this about anyone else. After being in the pen for a couple of years, she looks better.
She does.
She looks healthier. She's getting treatment. She's getting medical care, right? She's being cared. People are calling her and writing her letters, and
she was somebody.
Yeah.
Dawn Botkins, her best friend from childhood, who we didn't interview for the film, but we had a relationship with, and she's in lots of the archive. She said to me that it was the only time she was ever safe in her life. She knew where those 3 square meals were coming from, and she had that stability. This is very sad.
And in being on death row too, I mean, it's not like she had any of the stuff that goes on in prison. I think she was sheltered from that too. So, or most of it, probably. So, and probably would pale in comparison to the stuff that she saw in the streets. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so no, it's quite. So, I guess the one last thing I wanted specifically about the story and her is like the thing that comes out a lot is a lot of discussion about her relationship with Tyra Moore, also. Mm-hmm. And many of Eileen's friends, families, people who've gotten to know her, really, if there is a blame game, they definitely put a lot of blame at Tyra's feet, don't they? To a degree.
Yeah, and it was something we really wrestled with, understanding as we do that Tyra Moore continues to be someone, who lives in the world, and the responsibilities we had to kind of to that story. And as with so many things in the story, the truth is kind of unclear. I mean, it's pretty categorical that Aileen committed these murders, and that if we're talking about blame for that, it can really not be shared elsewhere. I think people close to Aileen, but followers of the story identify correctly that betrayal and Tyra's kind of a collusion, or so to speak, with the police was the thing that kind of sealed Eileen's fate, so to speak. But for me, the interesting thing, and that's of course the focus of the movie Monster, is that relationship. And I think it's because it was potentially one of the only times in Eileen's life that she had a loving relationship. And I think the way in which that was the thing that convicted her sort of flies in the face of an investigation that is many times painting her as a monster. There's a kind of hypocrisy there, that she's being portrayed in the media as this worse than the worst monster, but then there's an understanding as well by those same people that this was the way to kind of get her. Does that make sense?
No, it does, and I actually and thanks for kind of clarifying that, because I don't really mean they're blame her. The betrayal, I think, is what gets people upset about Tyra Moore. But as you also point out, and I think the Dateline archive shows you in the rushes, is just the lack of, because again, this kind of gets back to the story. Here we are again, yet another true crime story where either the prosecution or the cops, well, not even so much the cops in this case, but certainly the prosecution doesn't do all their due diligence or whatever. I mean, that was interesting, the stuff that was admitted into a trial that would never get away. No one would ever get away with that.
And this isn't about whether or not she did it, or whether or not she would have got off had that damning evidence against that first victim, but it's about, we need to hope that the criminal justice system does its job and that justice is served correctly. And I think that prosecutor's an interesting person to discuss, John Tanner, who prosecutes her and who was interviewed and a real character in the film. And you talked about this period of time being interesting. He'd actually been really central in an earlier case that people may know of, Ted Bundy. And he had been Ted Bundy's prayer partner, and had been really a key figure in kind of helping Bundy have his trial moved to Miami from Central Florida so that he would have a more cosmopolitan jury, and also had been part of the kind of rallying to stay Bundy's execution. So to then see that figure kind of 3 years later being so central to prosecuting and frame and sort of having Aileen understood as a monster was a really interesting thing to discover in the course of making this film.
That's very interesting. Yeah, it's you say there's no black and white, but that is night and day between, the way his treatment or views of Bundy versus the way she's treated. I mean,
not that we should be entering this game of like serial killer top trumps and like who's less good or who's less bad. There's a
exactly.
hypocrisy at the heart of kind of, it feels like central to the state's case was her kind of transgression of being a woman and what we should expect a woman to be, and allowances are made when it's a man.
Yeah. Well, how did you become involved with this project?
I happened to be at BBC Studios at the time that they had this piece of access to Jasmine, and then Netflix asked me to look into it, and the team had been working really brilliantly with Jasmine, who was just so incredibly generous with sharing this interview, and her relationship with Aileen, with us, it was a real joy to collaborate with Jasmine and to kind of win her trust in that way, because she hadn't given that interview to anybody before, and it's a deeply personal thing, the relationship she had with Aileen. She shared the letters they'd been writing for 10 years, Eileen's unpublished autobiography. She really was able to give us an insight into this woman. It was an extraordinary privilege.
And why had that footage remained hidden all these years?
I think the weight of responsibility of it finding the right hands.
Right.
I think she just,
I mean, it's interesting because we're in a day when people are, people get their phones out immediately and want to film instead of even helping out, want to film a crime going on and then share it or whatever, immediately. Everyone wants to share whatever they're filming, and to sit on that for, over 20 years, it's quite something. But I guess, I mean, and any other like main challenges in telling this story besides the ones we've discussed? The
challenges, I guess it's just like those ethical ones that you always grapple with as filmmakers, that there aren't really any rules written because each project you embark on is so unique and bespoke, and it just felt like a real responsibility to get it right ethically, morally, and as you say, in an area where there have been so many films, and I have watched, I think, all of them. To really
how many are there roughly?
I think I watched 20 docs.
No, 20.
Yeah. And most of there are like, an incredible film, 2 incredible films by Nick Broomfield, a sort of titan of British documentary filmmaking, the Monster movie, but then there are like many true crime tellings of the procedural story and the victim, or loads and loads of stuff. Just wanting to get it right and wanting to feel like we were genuinely bringing something new to the story. Well,
I think you've done that. So well done. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, and thank you, Netflix. Do appreciate it. I think I think we're actually, hard to believe, but I think we're coming to the end of our time together. I mean, what's next for you in terms of your career? I mean, you're probably going to bask in this for a little bit and take care of your son, your infant son. But what is next for you?
Just thinking about the next thing. They're pretty consuming, these projects, and it's been a long one. So I think taking a moment of pause, got a newborn baby, and thinking about the next thing. Not sure yet.
I mean, these projects, that's just documentary filmmaking generally, right? I mean, I shouldn't say, you're fortunate you've had this project, because, a lot of people are struggling getting projects.
It's a really difficult time, just generally. I think in many industries, but yeah, in docs and films, and yeah, it's a really uncertain time. But you know, I think we all believe in their value, and yeah, hopefully it's a blip and not a kind of.
Well, you keep plugging away. All right. Well, thank you so much. A big thanks to Emily Turner, the director of Aileen, Queen of the Serial Killers, about Aileen Wuornos, streams on Netflix from October 30th. Check it out. And please like the episode and follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And remember to ring the bell to be notified of future episodes. Thanks again. Really appreciate it, Emily, and love to have you on again sometime when that next project does drop.
Thanks so much. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for listening to Factual America. Please subscribe and like us, and share us with friends and family. Find us on YouTube, social media, and factualamerica.com. This is Matthew Sherwood, signing off.